Okay, so we took a bit of a break from these sessions, and now we're back on them a little bit. One of the things I wanted to talk about was kind of wrapping up a little bit about door issues that people are having. And what we have here is new door rubber versus an original door rubber. A couple things to know. The original door sills disappeared, gee whiz, probably 10 years ago. And you had a lot of aftermarket stuff that came out, and the rubber they were using was either a little too firm and didn't yield, or it tended to be a bit too oversized. In either case, what it would do is it would affect the actual door closing. And a lot of people have had that problem. We get that email all the time, how do I make this better? And because that is such a loaded question with so many things that affect the overall fitment of a door gasket, I thought we probably should bring you up to speed on some things. One, there are now recently on the market softer, thinner door sills, and that's what we have here. This door sill just came in a couple days ago, and it's for this car. Okay, here's the original one. We tend to want to hang on to the original ones at all possible, because if the overall door shut quite well with the original rubber and the rubber itself is in fairly good condition, we may end up using it. If the rubber has become firm or just completely hard, it's not rubber anymore. It's now a form of plastic, if you will, and that's not advisable to use. Okay, although there are products out there that you can, spray or rub onto the rubber that will bring back some of its softness, and you can repurpose that door gasket if possible. I know Works makes a couple products. They made a rubber conditioner a couple years ago when we used to do Porsches, and it really did a number on the rubber. It would soften it up without breaking it up and deteriorating. But anyway, new door sills. First of all, they don't cost enough to not buy them. Okay, so if you need to replace the door sills on your car, then like I said, nowadays most people are actually producing a pretty good quality rubber now. Like I said, the door sills from 2-3 years ago, forget about it. They were oversized. They didn't give very much, and you had a heck of a time making them fit. So you ended up heating them, stretching them, gluing in place, cutting out some of it to get it to work, and it became a real problem. Now there are multiple things we're going to cover on the subject today. One, we're going to talk about actual fitment to a car, but we're also going to talk about the dangers of rubber, in the sense that the little problems that the rubber sills create, or rubber in general, used in isolation on a car. Like we have a Lancia Fulvia Zagato that we're working on, that because of the way it was constructed, the vibration isolators on the chassis actually really tore the car up over time. And you'll see what we're talking about on that later. But anyway, so door sills. Now here's the thing. Your car has a double locking latch system. Okay, so you need to make sure that your car fully closes on the second latch. In other words, take the old rubber out, make sure it's fully closed on the second latch, and that the door is aligned at that point, because quite honestly, that shouldn't ever change. Once you have that fit to a place where it's right, everything else needs to work around it, not the other way around. So again, make sure that the double latch is on the second latching, okay, and the car's door is flush with the quarter panel. When you've achieved that, okay, and we talked about how to adjust doors and whatnot several videos ago. But once you've achieved that, then you can implement the new rubber. Now, it's very possible that if your car's ever been resprayed, that your car may not be on the second latching. It may be on the first safety latching, and you never knew about it. So, there's just things to know about it. A lot of people kind of give up on trying to get the door sills to fit sometimes. So they end up modifying the door latching to work on the first latch and working on what they have. Okay, so again, second latching, fully closed, flush to the quarter panel, then you can work with the rubber gasket. We'll show you what that's all about coming up next. Behind us is a Lancia Fulvia Zagato. We tend to get Zagatos in every now and again. Actually, more times than not, when we do get them in, it's just to do some general rust repair. The interesting thing about this car is that when we started in on the work that we're dealing with right now, Johnny here found some body filler stuffed into the chassis as a temporary patch, if you will. And it was also mixed in with some newspaper. The newspaper was from 1972. That means this car was only about 5 years old when it started having some pretty significant rust issues. Zagato, and Lancia for that matter, had some pretty impressive things they were doing even back then. This particular car, being an aluminum body car, front wheel drive, was pretty cool with a sub-chassis mounting system, meaning that the motor and transmission were isolated from the actual chassis on a rubber suspension setup. And it's a pretty tricky little thing, because what it does is it isolates the actual body of the vehicle away from the suspension, and it kind of really gives the car a little more responsiveness, because you're not absorbing the energy of the motor as well as the body in a lateral movement. But the thing of it is as often things were with Lancia and Zagato, sometimes things weren't developed or designed for long-term issues. And that seems to be something we've always ran into when we're dealing with these aluminum-bodied cars. This particular one, the rear sections of the chassis mount, again for the motor and transmission, were welded to the actual body. And the problem with that is you can never drop out the front end like you're supposed to on a major maintenance, and you're also taking away from the vehicle's performance design. Okay, so none of those parts are available, and so we have to make things, and this can be somewhat difficult thing to do, because we're talking about structural items. We're not talking about cosmetic items. And oftentimes when we have to do something structural, we don't want to necessarily match what was there. We want to try to improve upon it if we can. In this case, both of the rear mounting sections, you'll see those in a minute, they were heavily compromised on this car. And Johnny's going to show you what we had to make. Now, obviously as the thickness of metal goes up, the ability to make that metal move becomes increasingly more difficult. So when making these chassis pieces, we made them out of plate steel instead of 20 gauge or 18 gauge. We made them out of plate, so this way, this is the last time they'll ever have to be fixed. So anyway, Johnny's going to show you what that's all about, and we'll show you how they were installed in the car. Johnny?
So this is the rear section of the driver subframe. What this does is this bolts into a cross member on the driver's side that goes underneath the transmission and over to the other side, and does the same thing with the passenger side. Now, as you can see here, this is where we have some problems, some major problems. This is actually welded to a cup that gets bolted up to the car body, just like Darren was saying. If you can see in here, all the rust inside, it was flaking off of there. When I cut this piece out, I dumped it out. It just looked like a bunch of rusted cornflakes. That's exactly what it looked like. When thick metal like this rusts out, it begins to flake off in pieces. So I pulled it off. The metal's really, really suspicious, as you can see. And this is a really, really tricky piece that we had to make. Like Darren was saying, we just took some flat plate, we cut it up and TIG welded it, and this is what we came up with. We had to fabricate it to the right dimensions of it, just like the old one. You know, it's not very easy. It didn't take 10 minutes to do. I'm actually 2 days into fabricating this piece. So after I've mocked this piece up multiple times, I put it up into place, take it off, put it up into place, make sure everything fits. Now it's ready to go in. So now that I have all the pieces made, I'll stick it up in the car and weld it up into the subframe. We've got our rear subframe piece mounted up and bolted up into place. We're using 12.9 metric bolts, which is greater than 8.8 standard. And when you're dealing with suspension parts, you want to use at least a 12.9 grade so that they're nice and strong. So as you can see here, everything's mocked up, it's in a place, I've got my dimensions correct, and you can see the difference between this piece, the entire piece that we fabricated, compared to the passenger side piece that we repaired.
Okay, so yesterday we had talked about how to set up the car for putting in new door gaskets. There's a couple things I wanted to cover on this though. One, when I refer to the door being at zero set point, that means one thing. Now I'm gonna open this door. Right now this door is flush to the panel, okay? So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna slightly open it. Okay, now I have a gap on the door, all right? But it's on the first latching. There's two latch mechanisms on the actual door itself. So this is the pace in which you need to be looking at this. The first gap, make sure it's there, okay? And when it's on the second gap, second latch, it should be flush with the quarter panel, okay? If it's flush with the quarter panel, at that point you are zeroed out. The door is exactly where it should be, okay? And if that's the case, with your door gasket off prior to putting in a new one, look at the threshold plate. You should see a small gap between the threshold plate and the actual door itself. By the way, you really need to take your door card off. I know that sounds a little crazy, but this is why you do this. You take the door card off because when you put that new gasket in, if the door binds up on the latching, you're not going to be able to open this. Okay, so you take the door card off now because this way it's easy enough to access the latching on the back side inside the door to get the thing open. Okay, it's not uncommon for a new gasket to bind up and hold the door tight where you can't open it. You don't want to try to, lift the heck out of this because you're going to bend and potentially break up this metal right here. Okay, so step one, take the door card, door handles, and all accessories off the inside of the door. Okay, then pull out the old gasket. Now, if your car has been resprayed at all whatsoever in its history, do yourself a favor. Take the threshold trim off. You should see a tarry type like substance. This is called strip caulk. Okay, and what this is for is it's to isolate stainless steel, screws, aluminum trim. It's meant to isolate that metal from a painted surface because over time, the friction of those two different metals working against one another, eventually the paint's going to get rubbed raw. When it gets rubbed raw, it's going to start rusting. So this is why you need to make sure that all your stainless steel trim, whether it's this, these pieces, the actual clamping system that holds the gasket in place should have strip caulk behind it as well. So you've got to isolate all those components away from the paint so they don't come in full contact. You don't have to get crazy with it. This stuff kind of stretches like chewing gum. But you just need to make sure that it's somewhat of an isolation barrier between the paint and the hardware that's hanging on the paint. And you can't go wrong using this stuff. And odds are, if your car was repainted by somebody, they probably didn't use this stuff when they put all the bright work back on the car. So take the threshold cover off. Look underneath it. If there's nothing isolating the threshold trim from the actual painted surface, go get you some of this. You can get it at your automotive paint supplier, you name it. It's out there. It's not hard to find. And start checking out your product and make sure that threshold, the gasket bracketry, anything that comes in contact with the paint, make sure that it has the stuff between it and the paint, because if not, that's going to rub raw over time and you're going to start having unnecessary rust happening. Okay, so there's a good tech tip. Anyway, now that I got my door at zero, meaning that the panel and the door are flush to one another, and I'm on the second latch, I know that my door cannot be adjusted any more than it is. This is the other thing. Now, in a video we did a while ago, you can adjust how much lift you have to have on the door handle in order to open the door. Okay? Right where your actual internal door handle is, if you look at that nut and loosen it up, you can slide it in and out. Sliding it in and out raises the actual lever up and down, determining how much effort this needs to have in order to open the door. At this point, this should not take a lot of energy to get this door to open because I don't have a gasket pressing against it. Okay, so I'm fully open. I could potentially extend past this, but I shouldn't have to. Okay, and the door opens easily, exactly as it should. Okay, so with that said, we already isolated our threshold plate and all the bracketry that holds the door gasket. Now we're going to use our new door gasket. And these new door gaskets that we get in, they're thinner than they used to be a couple years ago. They're certainly a lot softer, so it shouldn't put a whole lot of stress on the door. Now again, if this hasn't been done on your car, don't think that there's a whole lot going on with the gasket, because odds are your door is not perfectly aligned to create equal pressure on the gasket. Okay, so what I'm saying here is odds are your door is going to be somewhat resistant when you shut the door with the new gasket in it, and that's okay. This stuff will soften up and it'll give some. But if it takes an awful lot of energy to shut the door, then something's not right and adjustments are needed, or the door gaskets may not be very good quality. Okay, so these are good quality ones. We don't have to worry about these. Basically, there's only one corner. That's where the two ends of the piece were seamed together, okay? And that goes right up in here. There is a left and a right. What you're looking for is the piece that has a little flap over it. That is to be on the outside, okay? The inside piece, you're going to put that into the corner, okay? And then you use these plastic trim handles here. And you're going to just pop it in there, and you're going to work your way all the way around, okay? So start at the corner. I always start a couple inches down from it, work your way up into the corner, and then work your way from here, okay? So work in two directions at once, okay? Because when you get down into this area over here, if this is done right and you hadn't had to pull any more or stretch any of the rubber to make it fit, it should fall right into that corner real easy. Okay, these are pretty accurately made, and it shouldn't be too big and it shouldn't be too small. There's photos that started off in this video. I'm going to take this down for now. There's photos that started off in this video that shows you what this car looked like when it first came to us. This is a perfect example of something that can really frustrate me being in the business. This car was, a couple of years ago, it's been here a while. This car a couple of years ago was this hideous yellow. It was supposedly restored. It had this little interesting badge inside the engine bay that was expressing that it was proudly built by somebody down in the southwest United States. We'll just leave it at that. And the person bought this car didn't even make it as far as Palm Springs before the car started having mega problems. The motor went south on them, so that's why we're putting a state-of-the-art twin spark in it at this point. And once the car got home, all the way up here to Washington State, it was put on a lift, and this thing, there was nothing holding together. Somebody had used like angle iron and riveted to the rockers, and then they put these fake rocker covers over it. So there was very little was keeping this car together. And more people than not would say, okay, I got to cut bait. This is not worth it to me. But this person had a pretty unique perspective, and we've told his story a lot. And it was, well, at least this way I'll know what I have, and it'll be built the way I want it, and I can make the car what I want it to be because it's not so blasphemous at this point. This particular car is kind of interesting. It's a step nose. It's a 72 Junior, and there's a lot of cool factors to it because of this. But this guy certainly took lemons and made great lemonade out of it. When this thing's done, you can have one of the finest examples of a GT out there. And the car is going to be exactly what he wanted it to be. But it's a bit of an annoyance because at some point in time somebody spent an awful lot of money having this thing restored, and whoever did the work really kind of took advantage of the situation, didn't use any appropriate replacement parts, just really kind of cobbled the work together, and the end user got stuck with a car that was not as good as it should have been. So anyway, with that said, now it's going to be a pretty fantastic car, and the guy's real proud of his selections with the cool Abarth white nose, the Kawasaki green stripe, which you can't really see, that separates the white from the blue. It's really well done, and we're really proud that we've been involved with this build. Okay, so in the process of putting this car back together, there's a few things that will, if you have to go through this level of process, there's a few things that will work against you. We have new limit straps in this, the early style. We like to upgrade to the later series when we're doing doors, but that wasn't an option in this case. But we have new limit straps in there. Those limit straps create a little bit of resistance until they start to wear in a little bit. Also, FYI, correct for a GTV, you see the little lollipop ones often on GTVs, and those aren't really ideal for the GTV, not to mention they're rather difficult to look at or look through in a GTV. So if you are contemplating mirrors, this is what's correct for a GTV. They work really well. You can see at them great. Anyway, so we have the new limit straps, which kind of create a little bit of resistance when the door is opening. Okay, we have our new gasket in. Okay, a new gasket, something I want to talk about on that. A new gasket, no matter how thin it is, it's going to create a little bit of resistance until it starts to yield. If you're having a hard time putting it in, let's think about what the temperature is like wherever it is you're at. If it's cold, the rubber doesn't want to yield. It's not going to want to stretch. It's not going to want to shape. So fire up your teapot, something to at least dip the sills in water a little bit, hot water, softens them up, gets them more malleable to put into place. Also, when you start on this, start in the corner like I said before, work your way down and your way out at the same time. As you're heading towards the lower bottom corner, towards the front of the car, keep an eye on that. When that gasket starts to come close to that corner, it shouldn't be pulled away from it. It should be quite clearly ready to fall into the corner. If not, you need to start stretching that rubber a little bit and back all the way over to the corner if you have to start working towards that. You want that to be fairly loose going into that, because if there's tension from it running a little short, it's going to pull right out. Okay, so again, make sure the rubber's warm and stretchable. Ideally use the really recent versions of these door gaskets, because again, the ones from a couple years ago, they're pretty hard, they're very unforgiving, they're oversized, they don't typically fit very well. You have to cut them and split them. It's not worth it. Door sills are relatively cheap in the greater scheme of things, okay? And also, if the car has ever been pulled apart before and resprayed, make sure that you have some of the sealant in between the bright work and the paint, okay? That's kind of critical, because if you don't have that, it's going to start rusting. And if it's been a couple years since that's been done, it probably already is rusting underneath there. So you should probably pull the bright work away from the door area and inspect, and get some of that strip caulk and start isolating those panels. And the other thing we want to make sure that we're aware of is that we're at 0 on the door latching, meaning that both latches are engaged and the door is flush to the quarter. Okay, if all those things are irrelevant, or if all those things are relevant, you should be good to go on that gasket. But last thing I want to make sure we understand, the threshold trim. If the cars have been pulled apart, there's no guarantee that that threshold trim was put back in the same exact place. If it's a little further out than it should be, when you put that new gasket in, it may never want to shut because it's pressing the gasket up against the door too tightly. So if you need to figure out what's going on, if the door gasket isn't shutting very well for you, this is what you do. You take a regular piece of paper, okay, and you close the door against it. If you pull from any area, you can feel it give a little bit, and then it comes to an area where it doesn't want to move at all, odds are that's where you're biting. If you bring it down to the bottom where the threshold is, you do that same process. Close the door on the paper as it's against the gasket. If it's too tight for you to pull that paper out from that gasket, it's bound up, and you need to make adjustments to the threshold in order for you to create a little bit of forgiveness, because when the door is shut up against the gasket, it's not supposed to be seriously compressed. It's supposed to be reasonably sealed against it, but that's about it. It's not supposed to be crushing the gasket. It's supposed to be just resting against the gasket, okay? And there's your probably last tip on how to install that gasket and door relationship. So now that we've done that on this car, one of the things I want to touch is always shut the door at first, making your adjustments with the window down, okay? Because the window tracks have their own inboard and outboard adjustment to them. Okay, so if you can shut the door quite easily or reasonably with the window down, and it becomes very difficult to do with the window up, then obviously your problem is somewhere in the upper quarters, okay? But before you go modifying this, remember the door window, this and the door window alignment guides are adjustable. They have some inner and outer movement to them, so you can bring the glass closer to the gasket or away from the gasket. So that's a pretty simple thing to do, but because you already pulled the door card off when you started this job, because you don't want to get caught with the door being jammed on you, it'll be even easier for you to do. All right? Look at that. Didn't take a whole lot of power to shut. The door's flush, it's not pushed off. I know it's on the second latching. I can't ask for more. We're good to go. Okay, so the premise of the story on this car, as you already know, is we're changing out the door gaskets. But we should probably look at this as a maintenance opportunity in respects. If you open up your door and you have a pre-72 US model car, and this is what you're seeing, this right here, okay, that is your check strap. That is a check strap that has lost its vulcanized rubber, okay. This is what it should look like, all right. And there's a couple things to know about this. This rubber, we'll call it rubber, although it's more of a polyurethane, is vulcanized to that metal strap you just saw, okay. And with that said, there are these rollers that are on the needles, okay, that are inside the actual door pocket. What comes first, chicken egg, don't know, but either the roll pins vulcanized rubber breaks or the strap surface itself starts to break. Either way, they deteriorate. And when you change these out, these will eventually break too. Okay, and when these break, the door has the ability to open up a little wider than it should, and that's where you get that nice little door ding right on the door where it meets the front quarter panel. Okay, so if you're at that point where you need to put new rubber in the car anyway, I would recommend that you change out the straps at the same time. They're not cheap, but they're not that expensive either. They're a whole lot cheaper than having a body man fix the doors if you monkey up the door because you didn't do this on a windy day. Anyhow, so I would suggest you change these out at the same time you're doing that door rubber. And also, if you've never taken your rear quarter windows out, you should probably think about doing that, because there's something else I want to show you. This is the hinge block. This little itty bitty guy right here. You get 3 of them on each quarter window, okay? And these things are actually kind of interesting. They are, I'll take the little sleeve off. They are almost a pyramid in effect. One side is wider than the other side. The narrower side goes into the quarter window track, okay? The wider side goes into the metal band that you bolt through. So what happens is when you take your door sill out, you're going to have that metal strip the door sill sits in right in front of the quarter window. You take that out, you'll see 3 screws. Okay, odds are, if the car's been resprayed, there probably isn't any of that strip caulk we were talking about in there. So once you change these out, because these are almost always broken, I guarantee you, anybody who pulls these out of their car, if they've never done this before, odds are these are already broken. So you're a bad day away from having your core window literally pop out of the pocket one day, okay? So you should probably change these out, or at least inspect them and make sure they're good to go, because these things don't hold up very long, okay? So changing door gaskets out, you should probably consider getting you some new hinge blocks and new door straps. You might as well just do the whole maintenance on that general area. Get you some strip caulk as well and start sealing up all those components that are resting up against the paint of your car. The car will last longer, you'll be happier, you'll avoid rust. There isn't a win in this that couldn't go all the way around.